Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So, I hear a lot of people talking about inflation and deflation lately. And, this one's kind of hard to wrap your head around, especially, when you think about how much money the Federal Reserve has been printing up and injecting into the system. You would think with this expansion of the money supply, the stimulus packages, all the money creation that has taken place right now, that you would have an inflationary scenario taking place. But really, we're having more of a deflation taking place right now because of the money velocity. It's not so much about how much money you have in the system, which does contribute to inflation. The more dollars there are out there, that devalues the currency, and when you devalue the currency, it takes more of that currency in order to buy the goods and services that you need. But it also has to do with money velocity, because really it's dollars switching hands that causes the inflation to kick in. You can have all the money in the world printed up, but as long as people are holding on to that and not spending it into the economy, then the goods and services are not going to be demanding more of that currency if it's sitting in bank accounts or if it's sitting in your, in your savings and not being spent. So it's money velocity that really kicks the inflation in. And, you really saw that take place back in like 2008, 2009 when, Ben Bernanke was going into the quantitative easing programs. They said this is going to cause runaway inflation, but it never did happen. In fact, the Federal Reserve had a hard time over the last 10 years achieving their 2% inflation goal. Now, if you go back and you judge inflation or measure inflation the way they did back in 20 years ago or back in the 60s, you would find that they do not even measure inflation the same way. It's not even comparing apples to apples anymore. And, we could do a whole other video about how they judge inflation now compared to back then. But if we just go by what they are saying, the Federal Reserve, they are still struggling to try and achieve that 2% inflation goal. Now, the Federal Reserve has two policies that they are supposed to achieve. They're supposed to keep stable prices and maximum employment. And even with maximum employment, the interest rates were very low, and the money changing hands, the money velocity, was not enough to keep inflation at that 2% goal. In fact, they were shooting under that 2%. And now here we are running into a recession, and the only way the Federal Reserve really had ever done their monetary policy up until this point was to drop interest rates. And when you dropped interest rates, that got people out there taking out new debt for houses, cars, vacations, whatever it is that they wanted to spend that money on. And that new debt would start entering into the system. This would start creating the money velocity, because the store doesn't really care whether or not you're paying hard-earned cash for it, for whatever item that you're buying, or if you're using a credit card. To them, that's the same. At the end of the day, they have $100 in their, in their till, whether it came from a credit card or came from cash. At the end of the day, the store looks at it as $100 regardless. But when you have people out there with easy access to credit, they're taking out credit cards or getting loans, and they're spending that money into the economy, this is creating the money velocity out there. And with everybody, well, not everybody, but when you have a dramatic rise in unemployment, the issuance of new credit starts to diminish. And the spending out there in the economy, that also drops. And this is where the deflation starts to kick in, because the money velocity really starts to slow down. And so this stimulus package, that's exactly what it is. It's meant to go out there and kind of kickstart the economy to try and get that money velocity going. But as the unemployment continues to rise, the deflation is going to continue to rise with it, or I guess the deflation drops, however you want to look at it. The money velocity slows down. So, like I said, even though the Federal Reserve is printing up all this money and injecting that into the system, it's all about money velocity, spending out there in the economy that causes the inflation, not so much the actual currency being out there. And then it's not just the unemployment that's causing the slowdown in money velocity. It's also the demographics. I mean, you got to think like who has the most money, and that's the aging population, like the baby boomers. They're the ones with the majority of the cash, and that's not really like a spending group. These people have a tendency to have already purchased everything that they're going to be purchasing. Like they don't need houses and cars and furniture, and most of the time they're not like into going on vacations as much as like say a younger person is to go traveling and stuff. They're most of the time they're just kind of hanging out around the house, or spending their time closer to home, conserving a lot of their money. And that's also part of the reason why you have this deflation taking place, is the demographics of people that are out there. And then on top of that, the younger crowd has a lot more debt nowadays with the student loans and the easy access to these credit cards and stuff. So with the unemployment down, the aging demographics, the younger crowd being in debt, yeah, we have a serious situation when it comes to deflation. Oh, looks like Life Flight is flying over us. Somebody's having a bad day today. We'll wait for them to fly by here. Yeah, I'll show you. So anyway, this is going to be one of the reasons why you're going to start seeing probably more stimulus checks going out there as the Federal Reserve is trying to jumpstart the economy and get things going again. Because until people start spending their money into the economy again, you're really not going to see unemployment drop. You're going to see unemployment continue to rise with the lockdown and everything else going on. And reading some of the articles talking about the Federal Reserve's monetary policy right now, really the only monetary policy that I see is this money printing and forward guidance. And now we already know forward guidance is nothing more than credible threats. And until people start feeling more comfortable about going out there and spending money at the theaters and going out to ball games and just being close to one another again, as far as not social distancing, we're going to have a problem with the money velocity picking up. So this is going to last for a long time, until I don't know, people feel confident about being out there in public spending their money again. So the Federal Reserve, they can continue to keep printing money and keep attempting to inject that into the system, but the inflation part of things, I think, is going to continue to stay down. We're probably going to have more of an issue with deflation over the next coming years than we would have an issue with inflation. Now, once the economy opens up again and businesses start opening up and the hiring starts to take place and people start feeling confident again and they start taking out new loans and injecting that into the system, then we're probably going to have an issue with inflation. But at first, it's going to be a major deflation taking place. And you can also think about all these toys that everybody bought. Like when the times were good, people had no problems going out there and buying, big trucks and buying jewelry and just, spending their money just kind of freely and wildly. Well, now that the unemployment is rising, people are going to need that cash. They would rather, make their house payment or their car payment. So they're probably going to start, getting out of the more expensive vehicles, get into cheaper ones, maybe downgrading their house, doing whatever they can to try and save as much money as possible. And that in turn will also cause a deflation. People taking out less credit and then even paying off their debts. And so really, if you have a credit contraction, that's also going to weigh on the deflation, issue, I guess. I don't know if it's an issue. To me, deflation is a good thing because I'm not in debt and I don't really have any assets to rise on an inflationary scenario. I guess if you have a lot of property or something like that, then you would want to see inflation kicking in, so you would see your property values rise or your asset prices rise. I am more of in the saving camp, and so I want to see my money buying more stuff. So I'm more of kind of in favor of a deflation. I'm not really in favor one way or the other. I'm just more of just an observer out there. But yeah, that's kind of what I see happening right now, is that, we're going to have a problem with deflation being more of a concern than inflation, at least for the next probably couple of years, I would assume, until Because, I mean, we have lost a lot of businesses, and it's going to take, entrepreneurs feeling confident about investing money into starting up new businesses to get this thing rocking and rolling again. But until then, yeah, we're probably going to start seeing a lot more stimulus coming out of the Federal Reserve, trying to jumpstart the economy. Anyway, that was some babbling from the Uneducated Economist. Let me give you guys a shot of the river. You guys let me know.